Hi, and welcome to the Leadership Development Armory Lesson 13. We are going to be going through a series where we look at understanding the different types of people groups that youth leaders will interact with. Today, we'll be hearing from Jim Sparks about understanding teens and tweens. Please be mindful that because this video was recorded on Zoom, the quality of the audio and visuals isn't great, but the quality of the content is exceptional. We hope that this lesson is of value to your ministry. Please enjoy.
Okay, we're going to get started as it is 1 p.m. and I'm sure people will be popping on as we get started, but welcome to the Leadership Development Armory. We're so happy to be renewed for a third season. I am Summer Bussey and I am the Christian Education Director for the Western Territory Youth Department. Over the next couple weeks, we're going to be looking through a series that's called Understanding, and it just talks about the different types of people groups that youth leaders interact with, and that ranges from primary kids all the way through officers. And we're going to be hearing from various experts within the youth department. And so I'm really excited to introduce you to Jim. I'm sure most everybody knows who Jim is, though, but he is going to be talking about understanding teens and tweens today. As a reminder, our overall objective of the Armory is to create a safe space for diligent learning in order to develop and equip youth leaders. And we also want this to just be a place to learn new things, ask questions, and make connections with fellow leaders in the Salvation Army. So Jim is our Territorial Director of Youth Ministry, and he has served in our department for over 20 years. Before that, he worked at full-time at Camp Daly, which was known as Craig's and Gilmore at the time. Jim also has 2 teenagers and a teenager at home, so he's got a ton of experience in this field. So we're really excited to hear from Jim today about understanding this people group. First, I'm going to ask Tice to just pray for us, and then we'll get started.
Let's pray. Lord, thank you so much for this opportunity to learn and to grow. Thank you that we can connect from different parts of the country and meet from very far away and share in the wisdom that you've provided us. Help us to keep our hearts open and our minds open to what you have to say to us so that we can better learn how to serve you and the youth of your kingdom. In your name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Thanks, Tice. Take it away.
All right. Thank you, everybody, for coming and hanging out and talking teenagers and tweenagers. The tweenage group is actually my favorite group, I think, if I had to actually pick one, because you just never know what you're going to get with tweens. 1 week, they could be balling out in their outfit, and then the next week they could be gothing out in their outfit. And it's a lot of exploration during that time, so it's kind of fun. Still kids, still kind of could be punks, so it's all fun. I like that group. I also like teenagers as well. And but first I wanted to ask you guys, you could type it in the chat or you could just come out and say it. What are the programs the Salvation Army has for teenagers and tweens? We'll lump them into one group. What are the actual programs that we have available for them? YPL for sure. YPL is funny because we call it the Young People's Legion. That's a weird name, honestly. Yeah, youth group, youth band, troops, corps cadets, yeah. We have junior soldiers as well, divisional youth retreats. Junior soldiers here's a funny thing, Bible comp, love it. What's funny about junior soldiers is I didn't know till after a couple of years of working in the youth department that junior soldiers actually went to the age of 18. In my head, it was just for like 7 to like 12-year-olds. So yeah, you have honored junior soldiers, senior soldiers, camp in itself. You have discipleship programs within camp that they could go into, whether it be like a surf program or Timothy, whatever they want to call it. There is a ton of programs. Just highlighting, there's actually quite a bit of programs for teens. And so with that comes a bunch of opportunities, and there's a lot of opportunities with that in teens, whether they're in troops and they could go and get extra awards and emblems. Higher awards is what they're called, or honor junior soldiers, or again getting involved in camp. There's a ton of opportunities for kids, and this is not even outlining the kind of the outreach mechanisms of our Red Shields, our Crux Centers, or VBS programs, which sounds like Captain Ernie's got going right now. Just a ton of opportunities for kids, and it's great. But I want to highlight something right from the beginning. I'm going to talk about tweens right in the beginning because the tween age group is the age group that has the largest drop off in attendance in youth group all as a whole. The National did a study on this a few years ago, and it was remarkable the drop off happening in the tween age years. A lot of talk is made about young adults leaving the church over and over again. That's been a point of talk for as long as I've been working here. But what we've actually found is the biggest drop off is in the tween group. And the question I get asked the most when I'm talking about or hanging out with tweens and teens from young youth workers and stuff like that is how do you connect with them? And that's really what we're going to talk about today. So we've highlighted some of the programs that are available. We could get into that further, but that's not really what this is about today. This is about understanding teenagers. And I'm going to start with tweens. And tween is really that 10 to 12-year-old group. Sometimes it's 11 to 13. It might be in your worksheet as 11 to 13, but it's really 10 to 12. We're talking middle school is those tweenage years. For some of us, that might be called the awkward years or the unfortunate years. But that's what we're going to be talking about first. And what you need to know is this is when they're really starting to shift focus on the opposite gender. And you really get quite a mix with this age group. It could be that they have full boyfriend or girlfriend and they're like practically married to cooties are still widely available and readily passed out with this age group. So, but there is a shift in focus, whether your student will admit it or not, is shifting focus on more relationships than anything else. And what does that mean? They are looking towards peers more than their parents. If you're a parent, I apologize. This is the really kind of the first moments where they're starting to like, I don't really need to listen to exactly what you're saying. And I'm looking more towards peers. And why do they do this? Because they're trying to find their groups. They're trying to get involved in their groups and trying to fit in. And so they're looking more towards their peers than their parents. Now, that's not to say that parents don't have influence. They still have a great deal of influence, but it might be the first time as a parent you start to see a little bit of like, they're not quite on board with everything that I'm saying. So yes, parents just don't understand. Comment start for sure. Yeah, you don't understand. And I always say, yeah, you're right. I was never a teenager. So so that's where you're starting to see more towards peers. They seek acceptance through peer groups, and I kind of made a joke about they could come in different, looking like they're parts of different groups when they come to your core on maybe midweek to even Sunday. You're like, what just happened? I thought you were a skater, and now you're like a rockabilly. I'm just hard to keep track. A lot of that is they're just trying to find their peer group in which they find acceptance. And this is a lot of times where their elementary school friends and them are starting to differ. And so they start to veer off in different paths. Whether good or bad doesn't matter. You're starting to veer off in different paths. You're taking value in different things, and you kind of want to be involved in those groups. This is where they're concerned about developing sexually. This is probably the root of a lot of issues because puberty is a weird kind of jacked up thing. Let's be honest. There's a lot of unknowns in puberty. What am I going to look like when I come out of all of this? How will I develop? What is my body outcome going to look like? Am I going to have am I going to be a muscle build, or if I'm going to be shapy, curvy, skinny, hairy, whatever it is, there's a lot of uncertainty. There's a lot of discomfort that comes obviously with all of this. And so that's usually the root of a lot of behavioral inconsistencies, is kind of just dealing with puberty as a whole. Some kids in a youth group, they don't seem like they're ever going to hit puberty. And then there's other kids that they sneeze and they got a armpit hair, like just after one sneeze. It happens that quick. And studies are actually showing that girls are starting puberty even earlier. Like there's been a big jump in that. And there's lots to read about that, and starting as early as 9. And so it's a very complex world that they're having to navigate. And not just their bodies, but just socially as well. This is a group where they really start to seek privacy. If you're a parent, you're likely to see the door shut a little bit more often at home. Maybe not giving you all the information that is happening at school and of what's going on, because they're seeking privacy. They're starting to seek their independence from you. And that's the case for the youth leader as well. This isn't just about parents. They might get a little bit more reserved. They could have been that 5th grader that gave you every bit of information that you've ever longed for, to now they're just buttoned up and they're not going to say anything. And that's normal. That's because they're starting to establish those privacy boundaries. Of course, there's exceptions to those. There's kids that will say everything. And honestly, if you work at camp, you want those kids nearby. If you're in leadership at anywhere, you want those kids nearby because they're going to tell you everything that's going on. And so those are your friends. I call them informants, but you can call them friends. They also want to be part of something important. They're recognizing a kind of a larger worldview of things, and recognizing the importance of being part of things. This is where Salvation Army lines itself up really well with this age group. There's a lot of bigger things that they feel like they could be a part of, whether it be a toy distribution and giving out toys, or backpack distribution, any of those type of things. Those are big wins for middle schoolers. They could recognize the importance of what is at stake going in those transactions. And so we wanted to get them involved in those type of activities because they recognize the importance, they recognize the value of that, and they want to be part of that. So program considerations for this age group is provide adult-like activities. Now there's a balance because they're not adults, but even the simple, take them out of the classroom and have them sit in couches and chairs like adults, make them feel like adults while delivering the same curriculum. Just that body language, just that room reset makes it feel like they're being part of an older age group, which is something that they long for and desire. So program adult-like activities with them, bearing in mind that they are not adults and they are still little kids. So they do like to play games. They'd still like to do all that stuff, but none of those kid games. And should I give you a list and you be correct? No, you can't figure it out. You'll never know with this group. You just have to check it out with your group. They love to explore other cultures and customs. Again, Salvation Army is lined up really well with this. There's so many cultures and customs within our congregations. This group particularly loves to explore this. I'll give an example. One of the activities my corps does is they do where they drive to different people's house. A progressive dinner is what it's called. They go and eat at different people's houses during Christmas time. And whoever's house is hosting, whoever's the host for that particular stop, the tradition is that they have to share what their Christmas traditions are and how they came to those traditions, and kind of gives you a window into that family. The young people love this type of stuff. They love to know your customs and your traditions and why it is that is the case. So like international food fair type stuff and cultural presentations, all that stuff does really, really well with this age group. They want to work on a project and then work on fine tuning that project. So don't be afraid to give this group a project to do and say, hey, look, we want to do, build these hygiene kits and put together these hygiene kits and have them be in charge and responsible for building that and figuring out those details. They like that. They like to be part of that. They understand the value of it. and getting involved in that. So do not hesitate to get them involved in those type of activities. This is a great time to begin facilitating mixed gender groups with projects. Mix the groups up. In some youth group cases, you have no choice. You have a very small group, but mix them up. Mix up those groups quite a bit, and you'll be surprised some of the outcomes you get out of that, and some of the interactions that you're getting out of that. And don't worry about them falling in love with each other. That will happen in middle school. The falling in love expiration date's about 2 weeks or so. So then they're kind of over it. Provide opportunities for them to make decisions. I'll say it again in the teen category, but too often we make programming decisions for our kids, not with our kids. And get your young people involved in the decision-making process of your core and your core planning when it comes to not just youth programs, but even some of the adult stuff. Include them in that decision-making process. Your young people need to be involved in the programs. They need to be up giving their testimonies, and or even just simple prayer, getting involved. That gives them, there's a lot of positives to it. It's reps of being in front of people. It could just push people to try something that they haven't done before, but it also gives the congregation an opportunity to understand who these kids are and maybe make a connection that way. And that's the most important part. I'll get to that in a little bit. But make sure that you provide opportunities for them to make decisions and are involved in that. The last thing I'll talk about with program considerations with this group is encourage talents. Now, in the developmental asset world, this is called Find Their Spark, which obviously I'm in full support of this program because it's just got a great name to it. But it's very simple. And this is actually part of my questions. Anytime I go to meet a new young person, usually within the first 3 to 4 questions, my question is, what is your thing? What is the thing that you enjoy doing the most? It's an easy question to ask that always has an answer. Even the I don't knows, you could get to an answer real quick. And because it's something that they're excited to talk about, and so they will. And that's a great opportunity for their first level of encouragement coming from you. And so, and if I were to talk to young Summer, I'd say, what are you most interested in? What is your thing? She might say dance. I just love dance. I'm like, man, I love dance. What kind of dance? That gives me a follow-up question. Now I'm engaged in a conversation. Are you into tap dance, or are you into the floppy on the ground type dance? And which they usually laugh and say, oh, that's called whatever. And then now you have what's called social capital. And then I would spend my time encouraging her on her dance and say, hey, I have seen you dance and I just think you're amazing. And I think that you've got a real knack for it. And I think you could do something with that. And then a step further, this is down the line as part of the Spark program, the developmental assets, is then finding a connection with that interest with an adult that has that interest that probably is not you. And make a connection. And so I would go to Summer and I'd say, hey, Summer, this is Eileen. And Eileen is actually a dancer. And Summer and Eileen may never have had a connection before. But because I've taken inventory of people's likes and the things that they care about, I'm able to make that connection. And now Summer has something to talk with Eileen about. Eileen has something to talk with Summer about. And they have social capital there. What it also does for that tween, it gives them like, hey, you might be the first adult that has whispered some promise in something that they're interested in, giving them hope for something that they're interested in. And so it's a significant thing. And put it in your first few questions. You'll be surprised in what their responses are. I get into more stories. I just don't have time. Let's talk about teenagers. Teenagers are 13, 18, and high schoolers. They are romanticizing and about sexual behavior, and sometimes engaged in sexual behavior. Again, this is another group that has just a wide gamut of what is happening in their life. And so you want to be very mindful of that, particularly if you're teaching on that topic. You have to have a real understanding of what your group is kind of been exposed to when you're teaching on that. That's kind of a whole separate workshop, but this is definitely a group in that. There's a lot of people falling in love in this age group. Again, they prefer to set their own goals. They're very much about independence. They're starting to think of adult things like what I want to be when I grow up, or what type of person I want to be when I grow up. They certainly want their independence. We've all seen so many shows depict this of the teenager. Maybe you've done this in your own life, saying, I want you to treat me like an adult. I'm like an adult," which they're not. But they want to have that feeling of independence. And so you have to try to find that balance of treating them like an adult, and but also recognizing that they're still just a kid, and they're going to think that way. I mean, their cognitive development is not fully formed, particularly in young boys. You're talking early 20s. And so I've only just fully formed my cognitive development. So congratulations to me on that. So I can't blame any of my poor decision making on lack of that. This is where this age group starts to see lots of imperfections in adults, and see right through adults. And it's because they're trying to form what they're going to be like when they're adult. And so they're really taking notice in your behavior and your language. They know when you're lying immediately. They have good sniffers. Those are really starting to develop. And so they start to see those imperfections and see that. And there's opportunities there for you to be maybe a little bit more open about your story, about different things, so they have a better understanding of where you came from. Also being mindful of how much information you give, but they start to see the imperfections in that. And interestingly enough, with a lot of teenagers, they have no problem sharing what your imperfections are. They'll tell you right away. And that's hard to hear sometimes. But it's kind of a normal process, and we did that ourselves, maybe not knowingly. But they really do start to see those imperfections in adults. There's a strong identification with admired adults. And I'm not talking like the crush, like the camp crush thing. Oh, he's cute and all that stuff, or she's cute. But they start to recognize the qualities in these adults that they're like, that's who I want to be. I want to be just like that person. I want a little bit just like that person. Or how he said that, that's how I want to be. And I remember doing that at the Corps. There's a few people at my Corps that I was like, gosh, that's who I want to be like. That guy right there. He seems to have figured it out. And really start to, there's a lot of observation going on, and you'll see even behavioral mimicking that. And so we want to be very mindful of that. They could see themselves from other points of view, which brings in more probably deeper conversations that we could have in our studies, Bible studies with them. They could start to see outside of themselves and take a look at themselves and their own lives. So that always makes for fun and interesting conversation. They desire a role in setting desire a role in setting life direction. There's a lot of talk of, particularly when they get in that second half of high school, what schools they want to do, or what careers that they want to do, when they want to get married. Some have it planned out when they're getting married at 16. Those are very fortunate people. I don't know if that ever happens. I haven't done study on that, but there's a lot of that. The most common question I get from the late high schoolers to early young adults, without a question, the most common question that I get is, how did you meet your wife? And how did you know that you were in love? That's super common, a super common question. And because they want to understand about that, as if maybe there's some sort of magic sauce, magic moment that they may miss. I don't know. But it's a lot of it is because they're trying to set their life directions and trying to see what it could look like. And so they don't just ask you, they ask a lot of adults these types of questions. So program considerations for that, allow them to be part of the decision-making process. If your core council doesn't have a young person on it, a young adult or a teenager on it, I would encourage you to put one on. It's great experience. there's a lot of positives, great experience, but they could put it on their resume for colleges. They could get actively involved in larger things. But for me, the most important thing is they could bring a voice that is not always in the room when decisions are being made. A quick example is the core I go to wanted to put in a full coffee cafe shop for young adults where they could hang out with their friends and do all the stuff, and they could come over a couple times a week or whatever, and they were set and they passed a budget to do all that stuff. And I just happened to ask, do we know if the young adults want that? We know that they're actually going to do it. And everyone's like, oh yeah, no, this would be amazing. This would show it. And it's like, well, we should ask them. And we asked them and they said, no, we don't want any of that. We're busy enough. We're not going to come to it. And so the core wouldn't have gotten that far down the line had we been more accepting of getting younger people involved in those discussions. So I think it's critical to make sure that they are part of the decision-making process. They're in the room where it happens. I think there's some sort of musical about that. Let them be part of the bigger picture and to make a difference. There's a lot of dreaming that happens in this group, and sometimes it's crazy, but sometimes they have incredible ideas that could change the course of your core and your program. And so allow them to be part of that bigger picture. And so part of that is you mentoring them and sharing, saying, hey, look, this is where we're heading. This is where we want to go. And these are some of our goals. Allow them in on that. There's an excitement that grows when they get to be part of those discussions. Show off their individual differences, allow program things so that they could be themselves and they could show off who they are and where they come from and what they believe and how they care and all that stuff. Allow them to be their individual self. I think a mistake, sometimes we do it on purpose, sometimes we do it on accident, is trying to pigeonhole kids to how we want them to be, how we think that kids should be. And that's it's kind of dangerous because maybe we weren't very good at it and maybe we're not good at it now. And so we just want people to be good humans that love Jesus. And so let's guide them in that direction and allow them to express some individuality. They're willing to take on responsibility for others. Excuse me. And so this is an opportunity to provide opportunities to take on projects, just like the middle schoolers. Maybe these are larger projects, and so maybe this is organizing the food pantry for distribution during Christmas, or maybe this is organizing their their own youth event. And excuse me, I got a cough. Or maybe organizing their own youth event, and it's done completely by them, and you're there just to make sure that they're not spending a ton of money. And so allow them to take responsibility. Encourage leadership, but don't discourage when they can't do it. In the Salvation Army, we tend to have a tendency to, particularly young adults, late teenagers, young adults, that you're doing youth work, or we really don't have a spot for you. And not everyone's geared up for youth work. And there's plenty of spots in the congregation for young people to do. Encourage them to get involved in leadership. And I would say, I would caution you to not put them in charge of things right away unless they are more than capable. There's plenty of those, but a lot of them are not. And we put them in charge and then they burn out immediately. And so get them into a path. I like to call it a drafting path, where they could get in behind a leader, a mentor, and kind of draft behind them and learn from them. And then when they're ready to make their pass, then that wind resistance has been in front of them and gotten ahead of them, and they'll be freer to go. And then again, provide opportunity for mixed gender work projects, get everybody involved together. Now, Culture Watch, I'm not going to touch a ton on this, but the best way, I'll make it very simple. The best way to understand teenagers or tweens is to invest in understanding them. And it's as easy and simple as talking to them, caring about them, and listening to them when you're engaged in interactions with them. one of the easiest ways, if you're not into heavy interaction and all that stuff, is when you're driving to the divisional youth retreat. This is a very simple thing, or long distance to camp or anything like that. Turn the radio off. If you're driving, turn the radio off. Absolutely, the radio does not need to be on, as far as I'm concerned. Turn it off and listen, and you will get so much information about your kids. You will have tons of social capital, because young people, we never did this, of course, but young people, if your eyes are not on them, they think you're not listening. And so they'll just start opening up and they'll start talking and they'll have at it. And you could know who likes who often. And you know how they did on their tests. You know all kinds of things. You know the drama. You know all that stuff. And all I do is just bank all that information. And I could talk about it to them later. But easy research to do if you don't understand some of the words they're saying, and look them up. Just look them up, and don't be well, I don't understand what you're saying. Go and look it up. It's not that hard to search up Riz, what Riz is. It's pretty easy to figure out what that is. I listed a few websites that could help you on those are easy links for you to just go in and look. And cpyu.org is great. It's the Center for Parent and Youth Understanding. This is a great one for you to go in. They cover a lot of topics, a lot of blog posts, and will point you in a lot of the right directions of what's going on currently. This is all from a Christian perspective. The second one, I think the first one I put on there is actually we do a bi-weekly vlog video, I guess is what we're calling it, but it's a news piece. But I talk about youth culture every other week in there, highlight what's going on in youth culture. It's an easy 5 to 6 minute read, and I mean 5-6 minute watch, and you could get a little pieces of information. Because here's the thing, if you're able to, in context, say a couple things or recognize what they're talking about, it goes a long way with them. Now, there's a fine line. You don't need to be cool. You don't need to try to be cool, because you're not cool. None of us are cool. Everyone here is not cool. And if that's hard for you to hear, sorry, I'm just going to be very honest with you. You're just not cool. And if you have an understanding of your lack of coolness, then you're going to be just fine in your youth group. ypulse.com is a kind of a youth culture website that's giving you information that you could go on. And then there's a link there to a PBS special called Merchants of Cool. It is actually very old. It is a very old thing. And but watched it recently to see if it still holds up. It still holds up. The teachings in there are very valuable, and they still hold up, and they still would be beneficial for you to watch. And it really breaks down the rise of MTV and how they became so good at hitting their target audience. So be sure to check that out. I'm just going to kind of whip through some of this stuff, and then we'll get into a little bit more questions. I see some comments in there. I'll get to those in just a sec. But programs with them and for them. This is almost a FUBU approach, if you're familiar with FUBU. If not, then go look it up, FUBU. I see that Summer is jumping on right now to find out what FUBU is, and thank you. So, but programs with them and for them, and in program to their level. That level is different for each one of you. It's a very different level, and you need to recognize what level you're at. And then utilize what the Armory already has. We highlighted a bunch of programs, a bunch of things in that the Armory has. And actually in the teenager age group and middle school and teenagers, that there are more programs than that for those age groups than anywhere else. And so if that means you have to get into one of those programs and manipulate the program to fits your needs, then do that. Orange curriculum is vast. You could use Orange curriculum in a bunch of different ways. It doesn't have to be just in the Sunday school setting and a classroom. You can use it for YPL. You can use it for VBS. You can use the junior soldier curriculum for junior church. That's a great opportunity to use the junior soldier curriculum. Use the programs. They're already built for us. It's very easy, and just stylize it for your group. It's impossible, by the way, to make one style work for everybody. So it's your responsibility to make that style. Relationships, communicate with them, ask open-ended questions, because anytime you say, hey, how was school today? They're going to say, fine. That's it. That's all you're going to get. Or you might even get a, fine. So you might get an in there. All right. So a question that I always ask if it's about school, I'm like, tell me what was the last thing that you laughed super hard at that happened at school? That's an open-ended question, and it usually brings a smile to their face, and they usually tell a story that doesn't quite make sense to you because you weren't there, but they're happy to start telling you a story. Ask open-ended questions. If you struggle with open-ended questions, Google ask open-ended questions. They give you a bunch of them. It's very easy. Pick your battles. There's going to be kids that are rough in your group. You're going to have to pick your battles. In some cases, if they're swearing up a storm and that's just a way that they communicate at home, that's a battle that you're just going to have to pick. And you're just going to be like, hey, while that might be okay at home, here it's not okay. And you have to be patient with that process. We can't be dropping hammers down right and left. And so you have to pick your battles on some of that. That's just one small example. Know their inner circle, their family, and their standing order in relationships. And by doing this is just as repeatedly asking questions and seeing what's going on, and asking questions of who do you live in the house with, who lives with you, like if you don't know, and just asking those types of questions. So you have a kind of an order. And a question I ask a lot of time, hey, who's your lunch table? Who's at your lunch table at lunch? Like, who's your people? And they may say Fernando, Angelica, they may say all these people, and I'm just taking an inventory. And then the next time I talk to them, hey, just checking, is Fernando still at the table with you at lunch? And that way they know that you care enough that you remembered one of their friends' names, but then you're also checking in on their social circles and see if anything like that is changing. You should know their family, know who's in their family and kind of what's going on. All that can be done by asking questions, not super probing questions. You could ask very basic questions to get there. The hardest part, honestly, is you caring enough to retain that information. Just be kind of blunt with that. Connect their behaviors to appropriate consequences. This is more behavioral management, and be very mindful of that. And create and follow appropriate boundaries. There has to be a level of boundaries. You can't be a complete open book to them, because interpretation could take them in a very different direction. And so you want to have appropriate boundaries. You also want to have appropriate boundaries for your personal life as well. They don't need to know your entire personal life. You're not best friends with them. And at the end of the day, you're their leader. And so you want to have appropriate boundaries with them. You obviously want to have appropriate protecting the mission boundaries as well, and being very mindful of that. If a minor is texting you personally, you need to be bringing in other people into that. You want to be very mindful for all of that. But boundaries are one of the largest issues that youth workers fail, honestly. And they're not that hard. Just create boundaries and follow them, and be very vocal about your boundaries with your young people. Attend meaningful moments in their life. This could take you all over the map. This could take you to things that you do not like. I attend things that I don't like. I don't like them. I go to them. I'm uncomfortable, but I know that it's not about my feelings. It's about they see someone that cares about them has gone out of their way to sit in the audience to cheer them on no matter what it is. And that is a very, very important thing. I have attended basketball games where the kid never came off the bench. And you just walk over and say, hey, that was a heck of a game. And can you imagine how many more points they would have scored if they would have let you off that bench? You recognize it, and they don't care. They're just so happy to see you. And I can't tell you how many times I've been in the audience, whether it be an orchestral concert or a dance, and they see you and you can see their body language change because it matters. It matters to them. Attend meaningful moments in their life. And I recognize that there's corps officers in there. As corps officers, that should be part of your shtick too. Shouldn't be just limited to the youth workers. If you're available, go to their stuff. It matters. It really, really does matter. I know my kids love it, absolutely love it when they see that someone has come to watch them and something that they do. It takes on a different perspective, and it's not just for the moment now, but again, it's that social capital. So that when you see them on Sunday, you're like, hey man, I can't believe you guys got to play Star Wars in the orchestra. How rad is that? And I saw that you were on the timpani banging away. That was pretty cool. I didn't even know you did that because you play cornet over here. That's really cool. You have all of that, and it's guaranteed conversation with them. And then allow them to view snapshots in your life. Again, as they get older and teenagers, they want to know a little bit more about you, and allow those snapshots. Invite their family over for dinner at your house, see how you live, and be involved in that. Allow them to come to things, and or be part of, like if I'm building a set or something like that, allow them to be part of that kind of stuff. And that gives you an opportunity to talk about life and share and say, oh man, when I was in high school, I did blah 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 because I was kind of goofy. And like, you were goofy, you were kind of a nerd. I don't believe that, which I know, but they giving them a window into their life, it builds a deeper connection to them. And then lastly, maybe the most important thing is follow up. Everything is about follow up with young people. They want to hear from you. And if you had some impactful prayer time, life-changing moment, spiritual life-changing, you need to follow up with that and ask them, and keep going back to that and keep talking that through. If they said something like of concern, of even as small as like a test on the week before, you better believe that the first question that I'm going to be asking the next time I see him, how did the test go? And be ready for any answer, and just be encouraging him. Follow up shows that you care. Follow up shows that you were listening. Follow up means that they are special enough that you have been thinking about them this entire week or these entire couple of days. It's a significant thing to do. That is it for right now. Let's get into probably some questions. I did see some comments in there. Ernie, you are cool. It's just a different kind of cool. That's what I say to all people. We need to show this new generation importance of ministry through our core programs. Yeah, getting them involved in the core programs and seeing the importance of bringing people to Jesus, and no matter how they do that. That's great. Kevin's just being generous. Yes, and then having your own personal boundaries. Look, if you're a youth leader or a leader and you're starting to burn out, you have to start ringing the bells and saying, hey, look, I need some help. I'm burning out. I remember a long time ago, a youth worker wrote to us in the whole department a burnout letter, and she had quit. It was her quitting letter, and she wrote it. And the pain and anguish that she was going through, and this was a very, very cheerful, bubbly person that no one knew about, was life-changing for me. And so if you're struggling, you have to create those boundaries and be able to be open and say, hey, look, I'm really struggling. I need some breaks. I need this, and or I need some help because I can't do all this myself. But yes, important. Any questions about any of these age groups?
I could start us off with a question. I was gonna say, so like, our core even has like a really small range of ages, and they're like, like we have like some older and some like on the more younger side. So like with the teen and tween age group, like at what point do you kind of push them up or keep them lower? Like is there a method for that when it is kind of like a smaller group and maybe you need to have like an older kids and the younger kids, maybe you need to have one, or how do you kind of split that?
Yeah, that can be very tricky. I did Corps Cadets for a billion years, and my Corps Cadet age range was the entire age range of Corps Cadets, and some of those discussions are a little bit tricky. I tend to err on the side of older, and then I was very careful in my questions and how I would ask the questions. So I would teach more for older, but my questions a lot of times would be more in a younger age group of questions. and so I could get younger people. And if the temperature in that room allows for deeper questions, then deeper questions are easier to make than the starter questions. And so I would go from there. If it was heavier topics or more awkward topics where there's very clear differences like relationships and that kind of stuff, then I would split that up, try to bring in other people for that and say, hey, we're going to do this and this. In fact, my core just did that this couple weeks ago, 2 weeks ago. They split up that age group just to talk about that, and they had different people talking to that age group. But when teaching, I tend to err on the side of older than younger. And I feel like it's easier for younger people to kind of go up and stay with you than older kids coming down. They'll feel like you're talking down to them.
I have a kind of a question slash just statement. I'm really grateful that you're doing this teaching, Jim. I work with teens, and it has been in my officership. I thought that I could work with teens really well, and then coming to this core where I have some more difficult kids, I'm like, wait, oh my gosh, even though I'm not that much older than them, it's still completely different. And so I really appreciate this, but I just wanted to ask, are you guys planning on like a territorial level doing I think you did like a boot camp thing with the youth workers or something when I was at training school. But are you guys planning on doing that again? Because I think it's very, very helpful to have this kind of training and stuff.
Yes, we are actually. We just got approved for our location. So that information is coming out very soon, and it will be in January.
Great. Thank you.
Yep. And and keep at it. The hard part too is when, particularly if, and like Monique, in your case, where you were working with young people, went to training, so you didn't work with young people as much anymore, and going back, it changes dramatically, even just in 2 years.
Right.
All the issues change. And with the young people, with the change in just talk and mental health is a really, really big change. That's a big culture change that we're seeing, is so many people being able to young people talk freely about their mental health is really, it's kind of refreshing and scary all at the same time. More resources are obviously needed, but this group is far more open, and COVID really kind of broke that through, I think. And so um, so yeah, dealing with much heavier issues all of a sudden for some kids. And so we want to be prepared. Know your resources, know where you could point kids in the right direction to, particularly in the mental health services in your community. We can't give you that information because it's different in all the community, but know where your resources are, talk those through, and so that way you have those readily available when kids are struggling. So you have a more mature tween, but you have more in that age range and that are not how you would lead through that. Sorry, Kevin, I don't really understand that.
I think he's saying that there's one outlier who's like more above. I don't know, Kevin, you can correct me.
Oh, okay. If that's the case,
if like the outlier is that they're older, and that they're more mature.
okay. So that does happen. And I often find though that they still are kind of on the same level. And a lot of times they're just talking it up. And so that there are kids, there are exceptions that are like very mature and kind of old manish, and or old womanish, they're like, I don't know, wiser than yourself. And so those you want around, when I run into those type of kids, I tend to have them help me on a lot of things and say, hey, man, I need your help. And they're more than willing to help and jump in and help with the questions. But you need to be very mindful that even though they're helping and they're involved, that they're still a kid and they still want to be talked to. They still want to be cared for. They still want the same type of attention that kids that are less mature than they are. Yeah, they still want to have that. I tend to give those kids a little bit more of like, hey, I got you. You're a little bit older. I get you.
Kind of on the line of what Monique was saying is obviously the generational shifts kind of change youth work constantly. So what are some ways in which especially as we've kind of we're moving from Gen Z, kind of like some of our kids are Gen Z and Gen Alpha is going to start coming in. How should youth workers kind of cope with some of the generational changes?
Yeah, it's a great question. And that's something that's always ongoing as a youth leader. You have to be very mindful that the generations do change and they do think very differently from each other. And there's just, luckily enough, a wealth of information online that you could do. In fact, the 10 Spotlight this week talks about Gen Alpha, in which we share a link on how you could understand Gen Alpha, the basic understandings of Gen Alpha that's coming up. So you'll want to tune into that on Fridays when it comes out. And kind of how I tend to work is like 5 years down the line to start heading things off at the pass and say, okay, this group is into this. Start programming in that way. Start developing those programs in that way. I remember I started doing this with millennials. That's how old I am. And but looking at what's coming down the line, what's important, and how does that shift, because it changes how you program things altogether. But yeah, be educated. Generation Alpha is coming up. A very easy resource on Friday is I share a very simple resource that'll walk you through Generation Alpha. Is THQ Youth Department ever open to coming and leading a teen? Yeah. Yes, that would be rad. Yes, check it out. Very eclectic group. We have a lot of LGBTQ young people. We have a lot of LDS kids we're working with. We have a lot of unchurched. We have a few tipped to suicide. Wow, that is a crazy. That is a wild group. It is yeah, and it's such a mixed bag. And what's interesting is I think a lot of time these issues that young people are very open about have always been there. This isn't new, but they're just very open to it. And so it changes your mindset on it, where before a lot of the stuff was hidden and not shown. And so you programmed in a certain way. But with Ernie, with that type of a group, you really have to be very mindful of all that type of stuff. Yeah, and exactly. You gotta just love them and show them grace and stuff. And I, the most important thing is, as a youth leader, is they want to know you, the genuine you. They want to know, like in the book Growing Young, you should read Growing Young. Summer, can you put that link in there, the book Growing Young? It's with Fuller, and she will put the link in there for you guys to take a look at. But in that book, there's an interesting quote, a statistic actually. I can't remember the actual stat. Let's just say it's very high. And of the percentage of parents that have not actually shared their testimony with their young people, with their own kids, is extremely high. Christian parents. So if you're a pastor or youth worker, which is all of you guys, have you shared your actual testimony of how you came to know Jesus with your young people? Not from this pulpit and as part of your sermon as like these little snippets, but sat down on the couch and say, hey, this is how I came to know Jesus. This is how I came to know Christ. These are the things that I kind of struggled with and were able to battle through. They want to know the genuine you, and that's when you become cool, is when you're just genuine you. If you're a crazy youth group guy and all that stuff, that's what's difficult, because they see two different sides of you. They want to see the genuine you. Growing Young is free on Audible. Great, check it out. Wonder if Brad is talking, because I could listen to Brad. Yeah, any other questions?
I have another question.
Yeah.
So I know that one of the points that you made about the tweens and the teens is to treat them like adults. Obviously, they're not adults, but just treating them with that kind of respect. And unfortunately, with our teens, it's been it's like you give them an inch and they take a mile. So
Yeah.
like I don't take away their phones. Well, I wasn't taking away their phones. And when we ate dinner, I'm like, okay, you could be on your phones during dinner. And then when we get into the program, I'm just going to ask that you put them away. And they weren't doing that. They were constantly on their phones. I was constantly having to interrupt the program like over and over and over and over again. And so finally, you know, working with the team, we're like, I think we just have to get a phone box and have them put their phones in the box. And it's clear, they can see their phones. It's not me putting it in my pocket. But I've been here about a year now, and I really refrained from doing that because I didn't want to treat them like they were kids. But I just feel kind of like at a loss at this point. But when I hear you say that, I'm like, oh, like I know that's not what that is doing. It's not giving them that independence and treating them like an adult. So how would you navigate kids that are really rough and that take advantage of the little things that you give them, but you still want to treat them with like that independence as an adult?
Yeah, I mean, there is a hard balance there. I think you're doing the right thing. I think you've given them their opportunities. I think you've done all that stuff, but they end of the day, they're kids too. And honestly, adults have the same issue. They're on their phones, ignoring everything. We always say the kids are on their phones. Adults ignore all kinds of stuff over and over again. But having put them in the box is actually an incentive in a lot of ways of, you know, you'll get your phones when we're done with this and we want to have, you know, good conversation and all that stuff. And it can be an incentive. It also can create a pattern for them to be able to just automatically do it. And I don't think that's a bad thing. I don't think it's treating them like they're not adults. It's honoring the time that you have. And that's how I would be framing it. And you could say, we've built out time for you to be on your phones. And these are your times when you come in. But on these times, yeah, we got to put them in the box. And this is a time for us to hang out, have fun, and kind of learn from each other. And then you'll get your opportunities with your phones. And I want to honor that time if you're going to honor that time with me. So I don't think that's a bad thing. And I think talking to them in an adult-like manner about that, of this is why it is kind of honoring what I'm talking about, is treating them like adults. And you could make fun of adults and say, I would do the same for the adults that are in here. And, you know, that's the other thing too, is you have to make sure that if you're doing that, this is where the mistake comes in a lot, is adults tend to break those rules, even though they're trying to enforce those kids. So you guys have to model that behavior as well. And so whether it be in your youth group or even in church and stuff like that, be putting those phones away and modeling that behavior for them.
Can I add to that, Jim? That was a great response. When we set boundaries for how we behave in the group, like it's not a bad thing. I just spent like 5 minutes around your group, Monique, at Torrance the other day. I could tell they're a little more challenging. So boundaries are actually a good thing. They may not like it at the beginning, but like Jim says, might become actually a habit. Say, hey, when I come in, or when it comes to this time, we put the phones here. And so the expectations are still good. It might have to, take a minute for them to adjust to them, but expectations are good.
Yeah, and what makes it more challenging, Monique, is I know a lot of schools, teachers are just giving up on it. Like it's just this never-ending battle and stuff. So getting them to put it away for just a little bit is a significant win, and kind of take stock in that. But I know, like in schools, they try to say that there's no phones allowed, but it's a never-ending battle. All the kids are like this the entire time. Any other questions?
I can finish off with one more question.
Okay.
I know that sometimes there are different personalities that are like oil and water. So even like I have a kid in my youth group who like her personality, like we struggle with a little bit, and trying to be able to find those different ways where it's like she pushes those kind of boundaries a little bit more with me.
Yeah.
And I think it's because because our personalities don't quite connect. Like how do you kind of find the right groove where it's like when you're, because sometimes it's just like oftentimes I notice her pulling out like the things a lot more and more and more. And so sometimes I feel like she thinks that I'm like personally coming after her, and I'm like, I'm not, but like also like you're pushing me to kind of do these things as you keep on doing the same things over and over again. So I don't know what, how would you respond to that?
It's hard. It's hard, especially when they're annoying. Like, and I don't know if this person's annoying to you, but like we've all, let's be honest, run into kids. You're just like, okay, you're annoying. My general approach on that is I will go extra to try to understand them, understand what makes them tick, what they care about, and try to put things that are easy wins for them, so that they're earning easy wins with you. Because you may not know, you may be trying, I don't know if this is your case, but I've run into this where I'm like, no, I want you to do it this way. This is the way I want to do it. But that person may not, their brain may not operate that way and not do that. And so that's a struggle. And so their only opportunity is to just push back on you then, and come at you or push your buttons. And then in some cases, kids like that. They think it's funny, and they want to make you crack. I was that kid actually that wanted to make adults crack. So I try to go out of my way to do that. I would ask these type of questions. I do ask these questions. I go, hey, in that lesson that I just taught, how would you have taught that? How would you taught that? Like, and get their response, and kind of get their response, and do a little market research. And you might find they're like, actually, I would love it if you were able to write everything down. Or I would love it if you give me just like one little takeaway. I just need one takeaway. And you're like, oh, okay. Oftentimes there's an easy solution in there, and we're just missing it because we haven't asked. And so that's how I do. I'm willing to adjust how I figure things out. It sometimes adds another layer to what you have to do. But if it's easy wins for those kids, generally those kids, the oil and water type kids, if they find a groove with you, they could be your biggest loyalist, and be your biggest fans and advocates. And so trying to figure out what makes them tick, and it allows me to then, if I've had that conversation with them, to be able to point that out in a little bit of ways, or go out of my way. So say this is happening in Sunday school or midweek things, and you kind of figure out a groove. Then what I'm not opposed, and I've done this many times, is write a note in church on the bulletin, and I pass it down to them and say, hey, what do you think about this? And it's involving that. It gives them a little bit like, oh, they're following up, and gives me an opportunity to kind of back. And it's a little bit of like insider talk, even though you would show anybody what's going on. Obviously, you're not writing them personal notes because you're just creepy otherwise. But then you're able to get involved in there and find their groove. And generally, with kids that you find their groove, then they're good to go, and they'll push your buttons a lot less. Sometimes it's just really hard to find, and sometimes they just want to make you squirm. But you have to love them no matter what, and work to find that groove, because when you do, it is a great experience for both you and that student, and you'll have great moments.
Okay, well, we're rounding out the end of our meeting. So thanks everybody for jumping on and joining us, and for a great conversation. Thanks so much, Jim, for leading this conversation, and just giving so many just tangible ways that we can kind of implement an understanding of teens and tweens. So in 2 weeks, we'll actually be hearing from me about primary kids, understanding primary kids. So we hope to see you then. Thanks everybody for joining. Bye, guys.
See you guys.